Hey guys, welcome back to the Ultimate Stepic course. In the last few videos, we discussed all the controls on the top bar and discussed everything in the sequencer. So by now you should be able to route Stepic to your synthesizers or samplers and put together lots of different types of sequences. If you missed any of those videos, be sure to check out the video description below. So now we're in a good place to start talking about MIDI play. By default, Stepic is triggered when we start our transport. With MIDI play, we can trigger Stepic with our MIDI controller, create very interesting and complex arpeggios with options you might not know exist. So let's get started. The MIDI play button is located at the top bar right beneath the patterns, and when we click this here, the first thing that we see is transport mode, and by default this is on sync to host. And this means that once our transport starts running, then Stepic starts running as well. So let's take a look at that. But if we want to trigger Stepic with our MIDI keyboard, we can go here to MIDI play under transport mode and select note on. So now once we hit notes on our keyboard, then Stepic will start working. So in the MIDI play menu, it's important to understand what quantization mode does. So here we have two options. We have on, beat sync, or we have off. By default, this is going to be turned on, and what this does is keeps us in time with our song. So when our transport is running and we play a key, Stepic will wait until the next beat to drop us in, so we're always synced and play in time with our track. So check this out here. And if we were to turn this off, Stepic will be triggered the moment we press a key, regardless if we're playing in time or not. So let's go ahead and look at that real quick. And I'll try to play out of time. So if you're playing Stepic live, I would recommend to keep this option on. So next up in the MIDI play settings, we have note latch, which is off by default. If we turn this option on and we play a key, the key will be automatically held down for us. This is useful if you want to start a sequence by pressing a key and want to do other things while the sequence is running without having to hold any keys down. We can, however, press different notes and it will latch to that note. And anytime we want to stop this latch, we can either click on release latch right next to the MIDI play button or stop the transport. So let's go ahead and look at that real quick. So we have note latch on, and then we press play and hit a note. And if we stop our transport, that stops as well, or if we don't even play with our transport and just press a note, we can click the release latch right up here on the top right. So you may have noticed the pitch stays the same regardless of the key that we press. This can be useful if we have a program sequence that we like and just want to trigger it when we hit a note on our keyboard. However, if we want Stepic to play the notes we play on our keyboard, we can accomplish this by changing the note in mode to transpose. And that's found in MIDI play right beneath note latch, note in mode, transpose. And let's check that out here. Now, what's really cool about this feature is that the pitch and octave sliders will offset the notes that we play. So if we did something kind of like this here, maybe add some different notes here in our scale, and then maybe change a couple of these octaves like that, maybe make this one to 1, and take a listen here once we start playing. So definitely a cool feature. That's only a couple of notes that I played while I programmed a couple of these extra things here in Stepic. Transpose also has a few more tricks up its sleeve. If we click on MIDI play again, we can see note in scale transform. Here we can tell Stepic to accept all the notes on our keyboard or only accept the notes that are in our chosen scale. By default, this will be set to chromatic, meaning Stepic will accept any note that we play. If we change this here to ignore off scale, then any note that falls outside of our chosen scale will not be played. They will be ignored by Stepic entirely. So here I'll play an F. And as soon as I hit that F sharp, which is not in the scale of F minor, it'll be ignored by Stepic. But as soon as I go to the next note, this G here, it is accepted because it is in that scale. Then after this, we have to nearest. So here, if we play a note that falls outside of our scale, Stepic will transpose that note for us to the nearest note, keeping us in key. So here I'm going up chromatically, but it's snapping to our scale. So this is useful if we accidentally play a wrong note and we don't want any note dropouts, and we also want to stay in key. And it's an important thing to know that if you press a wrong note that's equal distance from the next note in key, Stepic will transpose that note to the lower note in the chosen scale. So next up, we have Transpose Mode, and by default, this is going to be on highest, which means if we play two notes at the same time, Stepic will play the higher pitch note, and if we change it to latest, Stepic will play the note that was played last. So an easy way to kind of see this here, if I have an F, and I place this down over here, and then another F up here, and these are playing at the same time, the higher note will take priority. However, if we change this to latest and then we move this one just a little bit to the right, the lower pitched one will take over after that. The next mode we have is the Arpeggiator. So under MIDI play, note in mode, let's change this to Arpeggiator. This one is one of my favorite arpeggiators I've ever used. So an arpeggiator will take a chord that we play and play those notes back individually in different patterns or different octaves. But what's unique about Stepic's arpeggiator is that it takes the pitch and the octave sliders into account, as well as the other sliders. You can kind of think as the pitch and octave sliders as a per step transposition source. If all the sliders are set to the bottom, Stepic functions as a regular arpeggiator, but the moment you change the pitch and octave sliders, Stepic will transpose the notes on those steps. This makes it possible to make some very interesting arpeggios, so let's first start out with a flat sequence. So here, the chord that I'm playing, Stepic is playing back those notes individually and they are rising in pitch. If we go to MIDI play on Arpeggiator mode, we can change this from up to down, so now our notes will descend in pitch. We can go to up down, so they'll go up and then down. Or we can go to down up. Now, it's important to remember with up, down, and down, up, the lowest notes and the highest notes will be repeated. So if we slow this down to 1/8, we can really hear what's going on. Now, if we don't want that and we just want the notes to go up and down, that's why we would want to change something to pendulum up or pendulum down. And also we have the play order, which is basically playing back the notes in the order that we played them in. So next up, we have these three random modes, which are quite special. The first random will play random notes, but also allows for consecutive notes to be played, which may happen quite often. Then we have random skip. Now, this is similar to random, but in this mode, consecutive notes will not be played, so each consecutive step will give a different note. And then finally, we have random each, and in this mode, the notes are still random, but it ensures that all the notes in the chord are played at least once per ARP cycle, and on the next ARP cycle, the order of those notes will be a different order. Let's take a quick look at these different random modes. So let's select the first one here, and then bring our master steps down to about 8, and then play a 3-note chord. So here we have a random sequence, but we can hear that we have those consecutive repetitive notes. And then if we go back to MIDI play and then change it to random skip and then do the same thing. Still a random sequence, but we don't have those consecutive repetitive notes. Now this is kind of similar to this green dice and purple dice that we saw in the previous video. Now, if we go to MIDI play and then we go down finally to random each, and then let's bring this down to about 4 steps. And what we can do here is make 4 notes here. Make maybe this one here, this guy and this guy. So we have 4 notes here and then 4 steps, and let's take a listen to that. So what's happening here, we have a random order, but all of these notes will be played in these 4 steps here. In the arpeggiator settings, we have a range of 1 through 4 octaves. By default, Stepic will move up the octaves. However, modes down, down, up, and pendulum down will actually descend octaves. Once we select an octave range that is not 1, we have a couple more options available. So the notes played in full range mode will be combined into a cycle across octaves. So take a listen to this here. We are in pendulum up, so we're going up and then back down over a range of 2 octaves. And then we have octave up spiral. So the chord is first played in 1 octave and then repeated in the next octave up. And then when the highest octave has completed, it will begin at the lowest octave. So something like this is best demonstrated on 3 octaves. And then it restarts here. And then we have octave up down spiral. Now this is similar to octave up spiral. The difference is that in this mode, once the highest octave chord is completed, it begins to descend in octaves and doesn't restart on the lowest octave. The Stepic release notes offer graphics of these different modes, so I highly suggest for you to check that out. A very unique feature of Stepic's arpeggiator is the arpeggiator feed. As we know, an arpeggiator works by playing the notes of a chord individually. In Stepic, each note gets played per step from our pool of notes. By default, this arpeggiator feed is set to per step. So this means that our notes will be fed into Stepic per step, regardless if a note is played or not. So what we can do here is bring this down to about 8, and then we can turn off steps 2, 4, 6, and 8, and you can right-click to turn these off a little bit quicker. And let's take a listen to these notes that I have here. So these are 4 notes. We're going to be playing this. Take a listen to what happens here. So here we only hear every other note in our chord, and this is because every step will process a note whether we hear this or not. So if we change this now to per note and take a listen to this here, we hear all these individual notes. Now, per note can be really cool if we want to keep our notes in our ARP and we want to give it a little bit of a rhythmic feel. So we can do something like this. We can put this all up to 16 and kind of turn some of these on, turn some of these off, something kind of like that, right? And then we can turn this to a little bit faster, 1 over 16, and then let's play this with our track here. Definitely pretty cool to play around with that. So another way we can show this is by using the divider with a 3-note chord. So we're going to put these 3 notes. And then what we can do is bring down our note length to 1 over 8, drop our steps down to 8, and then go to our divider, take a look at step 4, and let's bring this up to 2 and take a listen here. So once we get to step 4, then we hear the note get repeated. However, if we change this now to per note from per step, take a listen now. So here on step 4, it actually advances the notes in our ARP pool. So now we know how all the settings in the ARP work. Let's go ahead and put that to use and let's see what we can come up with. I'm going to be starting off this one here on pendulum up and see where it takes us. So yeah, the ARPs in here can get pretty insane with all of these features here. So next up we have chord play, and this is a feature in Stepic where we can play chords per step. The pitch and the octave sliders will transpose the chords that we play as well. We also have all the other sliders available to us that we can use to make chord play a little bit more interesting. So what we can do now is hit MIDI play and go to the note in mode from Arpeggiator. Let's change this to chord play, and let's bring our master steps down to about 8 and then keep this note length at 16. And then in our octaves on step 3, let's bring this up 1 octave, and then step 7, let's bring this up 1 octave and see what we have here. Yeah, with chord play, you can have a lot of fun, make some interesting rhythmic chords. I do want you to be aware that the chord editor notes that you would put in here will be ignored by Stepic because the focus is on playing chords live. Yeah, it's definitely a lot of fun. Stepic gives us quite a few options when it comes to using our pitch bend wheel. But before we dive into that, we need to tell FL Studio the range of pitch bend that we want to use. So up here on the top left, let's click this gear, and then over here on the pitch bend range, it's a default of 2. So we need to click and drag this all the way up to 24 because 24 is the max value that Stepic offers. So back here in Stepic, let's select MIDI play, and at the very bottom, we see pitch bend mode, and by default, this will be off. So let's go ahead and select this and then select Transpose Chromatic. And here we can see the range. So pitch bend up is going to be +12 and pitch down is going to be -12. And like I said before, this has a max value of +24 or -24. Now we can double click in here and type in a value, or we can do this much quicker by hovering our mouse and using our scroll wheel. So at the very top, we have +24, and then the bottom, we have -24. Now the really cool part is we can actually have asymmetrical ranges. So on the pitch bend up, we can scroll all the way down here and set this to a value of -1, for example. Or down here on the pitch bend down, we can set this to -5. So let's go ahead and listen to that. And we're going to go upwards on our pitch bend wheel. So we transpose 1 semitone downwards. Now, if we take our pitch bend wheel and go downwards, we're going to go down 5 semitones. Now, something like this is really cool because what we can do is, let's say if we want to go upwards, we can have +7, which is going to be the 5th. And then if we want to go downwards, we can leave this on -5. So either way we go, it's going to be adding a 5th, either higher pitched or lower pitched. Now this is where some of the magic happens as well. So let's set this back to a default of +12 and -12. What we can do as well is go to Transpose Chromatic and go to Transpose Scale. So when we were in Transpose Chromatic, it's literally just going through the chromatic scale, so all the notes. So if we were to listen to that and slowly move the pitch bend up and down, we can kind of tell that it's going through all the notes. And that wouldn't be very musical if we were doing something in key. So right now we're in F natural minor. If we change this to Transpose Chromatic to Transpose Scale, it's going to pitch bend inside our scale. So much more musical. So if we listen to this with our track, it's definitely a lot of fun to play Stepic in this way using your pitch bend because it feels very, very realistic, like you're actually playing something live. Now moving on from here, we have transpose scale. Let's go to transpose chord. And as you guessed it, this will transpose the chord. So let's take a listen to that here. So we're gonna have a chord maybe something like this. And if we used our pitch bend wheel, and with our track, and again, if that's a little bit too much of a range here, we can always dial this back down to maybe +5 and -5, something kind of like that, and give that a try. So if there's a certain configuration that you have set up and you would like Stepic to remember, up here in MIDI Play, you can click at the very bottom here and select Save as Defaults, and future instances of Stepic will load with those exact settings. If you want to go back to the default settings, simply click the Load Defaults. Earlier in the course, we spoke about switching patterns with CC numbers or with MIDI notes. This is a very useful feature if we have multiple patterns programmed and we want to switch between them on the fly. So to set something like this up, we need to go to the mapping settings in Stepic's top bar. So let's select over here, and we can see over here it says switch pattern 1, 2, 3 all the way to 16. So for example, for pattern 1, since I have 4 patterns programmed, I'm going to click here on note and select map, and then hit my note, and then go to the next one, hit the next note, next one, note, and next one, note. So it's really that simple. These are all programmed. So once I close this, I can switch between patterns by hitting the notes on my keyboard, as you can see down here. So let's check this out in our setting here. So let's start this from the beginning and let's take a listen. And to build upon this, let's go back to our first pattern by hitting our note here. I've programmed this MIDI clip in here. So basically, we can time when these patterns switch by entering these in our DAW. So if I activate this now, let's just watch this switch automatically when we want it to. And then right when the loop starts over again, it gets triggered to go back to pattern 1. So back in this menu here as well, if we scroll all the way to the bottom, we see the release latch note. So you can add that to a keyboard controller as well if you'd like to. And this is kind of useful if you're working in latch mode and you just want things on your keyboard instead of having to go to your computer screen every single time. On the left-hand side of Stepic's top bar, we have MIDI Thru. Now, when we send MIDI to Stepic, it doesn't pass through to our synths or our sampler. This menu allows us to send certain MIDI through Stepic to our synth or the sampler. And by default, all of these settings will be off. So the mod wheel here is a very important one. So let's say we have parameters in our synth that are modulated by our mod wheel, and we want to use that functionality while we're using Stepic. If we check the mod wheel box here, Stepic will pass through the mod wheel information to your synth, allowing you access to the synth's mod wheel. So in my case, my synthesizer's mod wheel is attached to the cutoff. So if we go ahead and play this here, and we move the mod wheel, we're basically using our mod wheel through Stepic that targets our synth. And really, we can put anything on that mod wheel. It's just really up to you what you want to do with that. So moving on from here, we have the pitch bend as well, and that's kind of a very similar concept as sending the information of the pitch bend through to your synth or your sampler. Another one I want to bring your attention to is this note on or off. So right now on our MIDI play, we are on sync to host, which means that Stepic starts when our song starts. But if we play some notes, we don't hear anything. So if we send information through, so we're sending our note information through Stepic to our synth. So it's basically kind of like having a note on. So once this is checked, we can play some notes. And this is a cool way to preview patches or something like that without always having to start Stepic. So back in this menu, we also have controller change, so CC events. We can send that through Stepic to our synth or sampler. If we have program changes programmed in our synth, we can check that here and control that through Stepic. And a very interesting one down here is consumed by Stepic. So basically, Stepic stops mapped notes in the MIDI mapping settings from triggering your synth, right? So if you're hitting different notes and it's triggering different patterns, you don't really want those notes to go through. But if you do, for example, you can click this here and it will send that through. So remember how this note still changes my pattern. See, when I'm changing these patterns here, these notes are still getting triggered, and we can turn this off. And now that won't get triggered anymore. And just in case you ever get confused, you turn this on here and you don't hear anything. That's because you also have to send the note information through as well. In the next video, we're going to talk all about the automation page and how we can set up controls from our synth or our sampler to be directly accessible and automated inside Stepic alongside our sequence. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something, and we'll see you in the next video.